We are back, starting part two of this video series on the Islamic Golden Age. Starting, you'll be right in here, starting with the labor force, and how. And I'm gonna put up my slides in a minute, kind of talking about that. We've already kind of talked about cropping and some of the revolutions in agriculture and some of the revolutions in the merchant economy, and how the Muslims were very advanced for their time, especially as compared to the Europeans. And you remember this was the extent of their empire. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and when we start looking at the labor force, we start looking at some of the inventions. It's quite extensive. When you start looking at it, I want to make sure I'm in the right spot here. So the labor force, also pretty revolutionary for the time. I'm going to put this into, nope. Sorry about that. Let me put that into the right slideshow here. There we go. That's better. The labor force was diverse, and women were actually employed in a wide variety of commercial activities, diverse occupations: farmers, construction workers, investors, doctors, nurses. To a certain extent, maybe more so than women in other societies were. They also had a monopoly over certain branches of the textiles and making textiles. And here's a picture of that. Inventions, a significant number of inventions taking place during the Islamic Golden Age that didn't necessarily carry over. And these were, again, you look at these and write down four that really stand out to you. Camera obscura is what you think it is. It's when you take and you project something on a wall using light. They were the first people to really do that. And some of these were very what's the word I'm looking for? Crude for the time period. I mean, these aren't what you think they are, toothpaste and shampoo and so on. But these were the first versions of it. So I want to go back a minute here to, and if you remember on the inventions, writing down four that really stand out to you would be helpful. They also, Baghdad was the capital of the Abbasid, and a major center of learning and trade, and the Muslim cities grew, and you had different ethnic backgrounds and suburbs and places of prayer, of course, found just outside of the main gates. They had pretty good domestic water systems for the time, um, that happened as well. Before I get to slaves, I want to talk a little bit about some other the sciences, and how there was a house of wisdom in Baghdad, sought to gather and translate world knowledge, even though this isn't something you necessarily need to get. And many classic works that would have otherwise been forgotten were actually translated into Arabic, and other and so on. A paper, originally a secret guarded by the Chinese, was obtained from prisoners, and spread to Islamic cities as some Samarkand and Baghdad improved on this. They improved a little bit on this technique, and there were actually people making books, but by, of course, the old-fashioned way of copying them down by hand, having scribes do that. And then there's the Sufis playing a large role in the spread of Islam to various regions around the world, and so on. So one thing to note, though, going back a little bit here, and I wanted to make a note of, we talked about the sciences, and I need to make you take notes, but I did want to make you take, you're going to need to take some notes about slaves. And the slaves occupied an important place in the economic life of the Islamic world. A large number exported from Eastern Africa to work in salt mines and in intensive labor plantations. And the best evidence for this is the Zhanish revolt in Iraq in the 9th century, and so that there was a revolt that proved the presence of the exportation of slaves from Eastern Africa. They were also used for some domestic work and so on. Slavery and the social structure. So this is where the Muslims were a bit unique. Slavery was practiced, but slaves, according to Islamic law, the Sharia, could be freed as an act of Islamic law, as an act of charity. Remember, charity being one of the pillars of Islam. So slaves were usually conquered, but they were not Muslim and could buy their freedom. So there was some social mobility and built into the system, not only from slaves, but because of other people's status in the military, religious positions, and education. So that also played a factor. I kind of talked about some of these. Islam allowed for some religious freedoms, kind of like the Mongols did. Um, Institutions, public libraries, academic degree institutions, libraries came along. A number of distinct features that allowed for the first libraries. Advances in math, business, water mills, taking place, mechanized labor using crankshafts and turbines for the first time. Literacy, more literacy, highest literacy rate among the pre-modern societies, alongside Athens and later China in the 10th century. So once they had introduced paper, they were transferred from an oral into a written culture, and this makes a big difference. Early science was going on, so astronomy. There's just a numerous discoveries in celestial spheres and heavenly bodies, chemistry, mathematics, the development of algebra and algorithms, and then, of course, medicine. We talked a little bit about in class, and we talked about how they had some work in early pharmaceutical. Al-Razi discovering measles and smallpox, the canon of medicine responsible for discovery of contagious diseases. These were the first. Some of these were lost, and then, of course, hospitals, Newton's other sciences that they contributed to. So, and these were early forms of this. So there's a lot of different, even in the arts, literature, a Book of 1001 Nights, music. You could go on and on and on about different contributions. Um, and I could post this for you to read if you were so interested. But the end of the Golden Age, two factors, and this is what you need to get down, two factors that eventually contribute to the fall. The Crusades in the 11th century, which I touched briefly on. That was the Christians' war against some of the Muslims and the Seljuk Turks, to try to dismantle their taking over the Holy Land. And then, of course, the Mongol invasion in the 13th century. So the Crusades had been a long and costly and eventually impacted the Golden Age of Islam. And then it eventually came to an end, but not without many contributions, some of which were lost a little bit and then were rediscovered in the Renaissance. So, and the Mongols and the Turks had conquered most of the Eurasian landmass, including both China and the old Islamic Empire in Russia and Eastern Europe. So all the stuff that the Russians had was, or that the Mongols had, was really lost. And this was the part that I showed you that was in highlighted in green, was their empire at the greatest extent.